Hello again, Jared Pitts here, and today I'm going to be reading another article by Dr. Ray Peat. This one is called Food Junk and Some Mystery Ailments: Fatigue, Alzheimer's, Colitis, Immunodeficiency. And again, another one I had not seen before. I saw a post by Master Metabolism. I always enjoy his posts. They're always spot on, and I believe it was on X. And so I was looking up something in regards to endotoxin, and this was the first article that popped up, and I had not seen it before. So anyway, I would like to read this one, so I'm going to go ahead and record it. So I hope you enjoy this, and I'm sure you will learn something extremely valuable. So just going to remind you before I get into the article that you can set up a free 15-minute consultation on MissouriHealthCoach.com, and then we can see how I can help you with your health journey. You can also support the channel by using my links in the description of my videos, and you'll get a certain percentage off from different companies like Health Natura and Life Giving Store, things like desiccated thyroid, aspirin, vitamin K2, vitamin D, things of this nature. Things that Dr. Peat researched and shared with us about. Okay, without further ado, this is how it goes. Years ago, I noticed that Oregon was one of the few states that still had real whipping cream and cottage cheese without additives. So I've been trustingly using cream in my coffee every day. Last week, I noticed that my cream listed Carrageenan in its ingredients. Over the years, I have avoided Carrageenan containing foods such as apple cider, hot dogs, most ice creams, and prepared sauces and jellies because they cause me to have serious allergic symptoms. Carrageenan has been found to cause colitis and anaphylaxis in humans, but it is often present in baby quote-unquote formulas and a wide range of milk products, with the result that many people have come to believe that it was the milk product that was responsible for their allergic symptoms. And this is probably one of the reasons I am, I wouldn't say hated amongst people that I know, but I'm sure I annoy people because anytime someone brings up that they have some type of dairy issue, I mean, this is the first thing that I go for. You know, is it really the dairy or is it the additives? The majority of the time it's the additives. And people sometimes get offended. I don't know why. People get so attached to their health issues. I think it's really some type of mental thing. I don't know exactly what it is, but people are attached to their health issues. People like to be the victim. People like to, and I've been there. I've done the same thing. Where I'm like, oh, I'm allergic to this thing. This is when I was, like in high school. It was part of my identity. I have a small allergic reaction to bananas back in the day. They would make my mouth break out in hives. And it doesn't happen anymore. I don't know what it was. I know Dr. Peat talks about the serotonin content of bananas. But anyway, it was a part of my identity. And same thing with dairy intolerance, whatever it might be. These things are part of people's identity. And it's funny to see how much it is. Anyway, I try to control how I respond these days more, so hopefully I'm becoming more wise. Okay, because the regulators claim that it is a safe natural substance, meaning Carrageenan, it is very likely that it sometimes appears in foods that don't list it on the label. For example, when it is part of another ingredient. And my daytime job is labels, and so on food products, and I can attest there are many ways to hide what is in something. Not that that's necessarily what people are trying to do, but they're just going by the rules, right? People are going by the rules dealed out by the FDA and whatever other regulatory body. They can, say if it's less than a particular percentage, they don't have to have it on there, or they can classify it under natural flavors, and there's all kinds of things. Look up the list of things that can go under natural flavors, and it is abhorrent. Okay, moving on. In the 1940s, Carrageenan, a polysaccharide made from a type of seaweed, was recognized as a dangerous allergen. Since then, it has become a standard laboratory material to use to produce inflammatory tumors, or granulomas, immunodeficiency, arthritis, and other inflammations. It has also become an increasingly common material in the food industry. Okay, have not read that before, that it's actually used to produce inflammatory tumors. That is shocking. It's good to have these reminders, and I try to not be so crazy about limiting what I eat, and I like to, when I'm with friends, I just do not ask. If someone's inviting me to their home, I do not ask, right? I don't want to know, and I love people more than I love my peace of mind, we'll call it, when it comes to what I'm eating. But it's good to have these reminders. Why do I avoid natural flavors? They're in everything. All right. Well, here it is, right? Ay. Articles are often written to praise its usefulness and to claim that it doesn't produce cancer in healthy animals. Its presence in food, like that of the polyester imitation fat, microcrystalline cellulose. Oh my goodness. That thing's in everything. And many other polymers used to stabilize emulsions or to increase smoothness is often justified by the doctrine that these molecules are too large to be absorbed. There are 2 points that are deliberately ignored by the food safety regulators. 1, these materials can interact dangerously with intestinal bacteria, and 2, they can be absorbed in the process called persorption. The sulfites, sodium bisulfite, potassium metabisulfite, etc., have been used as preservatives in foods and drugs for a long time, even though they were known to cause intense allergic reactions in some people. Fresh vegetables and fish, dried fruits, ham and other preserved meats, hominy, pickles, canned vegetables and juices, and wines were commonly treated with large amounts of the sulfites to prevent darkening and the development of unpleasant odors. People with asthma were known to be more sensitive than other people, but the sulfites could cause a fatal asthma-like attack even in someone who had never had asthma. Even when this was known, drugs used to treat asthma were preserved with sulfites. Oh my goodness. Was the information just slow to reach the people who made the products? No. The manufacturers knew about the deadly nature of their products, but they kept on selling them. The FDA didn't answer letters on the subject, and medical magazines such as JAMA declined to publish even brief letters seriously discussing the issue. Obviously, since many people died from the drug companies called quote-unquote paradoxical bronchoconstriction when they used the products, the drug companies had to be protected from lawsuits, and the medical magazines and the government regulators did that through the control of information. I think a similar situation exists now in relation to the effects of Carrageenan. Stress and anxiety sharply reduce the circulation of blood to the intestine and liver. Prolonged stress damages the ability of the intestinal cells to exclude large molecules. Local irritation and inflammation of the intestine also increase its permeability and decrease its ability to exclude harmful materials. But even the normal intestine is able to permit the passage of large molecules and particles. In many cases, particles larger than the cells that line the intestine. This persorption of particles has been demonstrated using particles of plastic, starch grains, which are sometimes several times larger than blood cells, and many other materials, including Carrageenan. One of the reasons it has been easy to convince the public that persorption doesn't happen is that there is a powerful myth in our culture about the existence of a quote-unquote semi-permeable, quote-unquote plasma membrane on cells through which only certain specific substances may pass. About 30 years ago, some biologists made a movie of living cells under the microscope, showing an amoeboid cell entering another cell, swimming around and leaving without encountering any perceptible resistance. Persorption of food particles moving in one side of a cell and out the other wouldn't seem so mysterious if more people had seen films of that sort. Also in the 1960s, Gerhard Volkheimer rediscovered the phenomenon of persorption, which had been demonstrated a century earlier. Starch grains or other hard particles can be found in the blood, urine, and other fluids after they have been ingested. The iodine stain for starch and the characteristic shape of the granules makes their observation very easy. The absorption of immunologically intact proteins and other particles have been demonstrated many times. But myth is more important than fact. All of my biology professors, for example, denied that proteins could be absorbed by any part of the digestive system. The accepted description of the absorption of chylomicrons, tiny particles of fat, helps to understand the way medical professors think about the intestine. These particles, they say, are disassembled by the intestine cells on one side. Their molecular parts are taken up by the cells, and similar particles are excreted out the other side of the cells, into the lymphatic vessels. As they visualize one of these cells, it consists of at least 4 barriers, with each theoretical cell surface membrane consisting of an outer water-compatible phase, an intramembranal lipid region, and an inner water-compatible phase where the membrane rests on the quote-unquote cell contents. Endocytosis, for example, the ingestion of a bacterial particle by a phagocyte, is described in a similar way, to avoid any breach of the quote-unquote lipid bilayer membrane. This mental armature has made it essentially impossible for the biomedical culture to assimilate the facts of persorption, which would have led 150 years ago to the scientific study of allergy and immunology in relation to the digestive system. Volkheimer found that mice fed raw starch aged at an abnormally fast rate. And when he dissected the starch-fed mice, he found a multitude of starch grain-blocked arterioles in every organ, each of which caused the death of the cells that depended on the blood supplied by that arteriole. It isn't hard to see how this would affect the functions of organs, such as the brain and heart, even without considering the immunological or other implications of the presence of foreign particles randomly distributed through the tissue. In 1979, some of my students in Mexico wanted a project to do in the lab. Since several traditional foods are made with corn that has been boiled in alkali, I thought it would be valuable to see whether this treatment reduced the ability of the starch grains to be persorbed. For breakfast, one day, they ate only atole, tamales, and tortillas, all made from the alkali-treated corn. None of the students could find any starch grains after centrifuging their blood and urine. That led me to substitute those foods whenever possible for other starches. Okay, and what he's talking about here with this, where does it say it exactly? A corn that has been boiled in alkali. And typically this is like a calcium substance, like a limestone. And this is what you would call masa, or nixtamalized, I think I'm saying that correctly, nixtamalized corn. He's saying that led him to substitute those foods whenever possible for other starches, right? So instead of doing other starches, he would use this. He's seen the positive use of this. And he's probably going to get further into that, but if you've read much of Peat, then you know that he's a fan of nixtamalized corn and how it'll actually balance out that phosphorus content with the calcium that is used, and there's other things that happen during that process that make it much more healthy and definitely less harmful than eating like straight corn flour. I have written previously about some of the environmental factors, including radiation, estrogens, and unsaturated fats that are known to damage the immune system and the brain, and that we have been increasingly exposed to since 1940. To better understand the nature of the diseases that are now becoming so common, we can look at them in a series from the bowel to the liver to the immune system and to the brain and hormones. The incidence of several inflammatory diseases, for example Crohn's disease, a chronic inflammation of the intestine, has been increasing during the last 50 years in the industrialized countries, and at the same time the incidence of several liver diseases has also been increasing. The entry of bacteria into the bloodstream, which can lead to septicemia, is ordinarily considered to be of importance only in extreme immunodeficiency states, such as old age or in premature infants. But the death rate of young adults from septicemia has been increasing rapidly since the 1940s. And this is where, like I said, I was looking up endotoxin and as it relates to Peat, and this is why this came up. We're probably going to get into that endotoxic aspect here in a second. The permeability of the intestine that allows bacteria to enter the bloodstream is very serious if the phagocytic cells are weakened. Carrageenan poisoning is one known cause of the disappearance of macrophages. Its powerful immunosuppression would tend to be superimposed onto the immunological damage that has been produced by radiation, unsaturated fats, and estrogens. The liver tumor that is characteristic of young women using the oral contraceptive pill is a hepatocellular adenoma, which is considered to be a pre-malignant tumor. In Japan, Mexico, and several European countries, the incidence of hepatocellular tumors has increased steadily and tremendously in recent decades, and it has increased in men as well as in women. This is the sort of tumor that very likely represents an increased burden of toxins absorbed from the bowel. Carrageenan contributes to the disappearance of the liver enzymes, the cytochrome P450 system, that detoxify drugs, hormones, and a variety of other chemicals. Carrageenan enters even the intact, uninflamed gut and damages both chemical defenses and immunological defenses. When it has produced inflammatory bowel damage, the amount absorbed will be greater, as will the absorption of bacterial endotoxin. Carrageenan and endotoxin synergize in many ways, including their effects on nitric oxide, prostaglandins, toxic free radicals, and other defensive enzyme systems. The continuing efficient production of energy is a basic aspect of metabolic defense, and this is interrupted by carrageenan and endotoxin. The energy failure becomes part of a vicious circle in which permeability of the intestine is increased by the very factors that it should exclude. Once the protective barrier functions of the intestine and liver have been damaged, allergens and many materials with specific biological effects can enter the tissues. The polysaccharide components of connective tissue constitute a major part of our regulatory system for maintaining differentiated cell functioning, and absorbed starches act as quote-unquote false signals with a great capacity for deranging cellular functioning. Several types of research indicate that carrageenan changes cellular function in complex ways, imitating changes seen in cancer, for example. R.J.V. Pulvertaft found, quote, a close similarity between Burkitt cells and human lymphocytes stimulated by bean extract. He concluded, quote, the possibility of a relation between Burkitt's lymphoma and a diet of beans should not be neglected, end quote, though he emphasized that other factors must be considered since most people who eat beans don't develop the disease. The intestinal parasites, which are common in tropical Africa, can cause inflammation of the bowel, leading to the absorption of large amounts of antigens. Since the bowel becomes inflamed in influenza It is reasonable to think that some of the symptoms of the quote-unquote flu are produced by absorbed bowel toxins. The variations in the post-influenza syndromes are very likely influenced by the nature of the bacteria or foods which are present, chronically or at the time of an uncompensated stress or inflammatory disease. K.M. Stevens has argued that while rheumatic fever and, I'm going to say this incorrectly, but glomerulonephritis are caused by the antigens of streptococci, systemic lupus erythematosus, or SLE, is probably caused by the antigens of gram-positive lactobacilli found in the normal flora. And just as a side note, we live in just a gigantic pool of viruses and bacteria. And the question is, why do some people get sick from them and why do some people not? And this permeability aspect, and just when the integrity of something is compromised, right? For example, the gut lining or the the myelin sheath on our nerve endings, when these get compromised, then they're exposed to these things, whether it's bacteria, bacterial endotoxin, viruses, right? And this is why, there's been studies done where they did the study where they tested people with polio, and only a certain percentage of them where they could find the polio virus actually. And if if this virus is all around us, why at some point would it attack our nerve endings and cause some type of paralyzation? And it's obviously because something's been compromised, right? So this is talking about, these issues happening when just a normal part of our flora can cause this problem when some lining or what have you is compromised. Moving on. Migraine, SLE, which it noted above, systemic lupus erythematosus. Okay, I'm not sure what that is. Chronic fatigue syndrome, thyroid problems, and some kinds of porphyria seem to be more common in women of reproductive age and are often exacerbated by premenstrual hormone changes. According to Stevens, quote, SLE is almost entirely a disease of women of childbearing age. One possibility for this selection could be that women during this period harbor a peculiar flora. This is indeed the case. Large numbers of gram-positive lactobacilli are present in the vagina only during the 30-odd years when regular menstrual activity is present. In 1974, I noticed that I consistently got a migraine headache after drinking a lactobacillus milk product, and stopped using and recommending yogurt and other lactobacillus foods, though I suspected it was the lactic acid which caused the immediate symptoms. Lactic acid is a metabolic burden, especially when combined with an estrogen excess. But Stevens' main point about the significance of our immunological response to systemic bacterial antigens deserves more attention. And, this is just one of the many things that people have a hard time with Ray Peat, when he's like, oh, maybe your fermented foods, maybe they are not helping you. Is it possible, right? The fact that they could be contaminated with mold or whatever. And then also the fact that these are all created with this type of bacteria that creates lactic acid. And so we know lactic acid is a byproduct of the type of energy production that happens when there's not enough oxygen, like glycolysis, right? Whereas we would prefer to be creating energy via oxidative phosphorylation, which utilizes oxygen and creates ATP, carbon dioxide, right? But when we work out and we use up that oxygen, we don't have enough sugar or glycogen stores, then our body goes through this different route and it creates this lactic acid, causes pain, inflammation, right? That's not a good thing. But then we eat food that has this lactic acid and we say, well, it's healthy. Maybe not. Okay, moving on. On a typical diet, tissues progressively accumulate linoleic acid, and this alters the structure of mitochondrial cardiolipin, which governs the response of the mitochondrial enzymes to the thyroid hormone. This process is especially evident in the female liver. In the quote-unquote autoimmune diseases such as lupus, there are typically antibodies to cardiolipin, as if the body were trying to reject its own tissues, which have been altered by the storage of linoleic acid. The altered mitochondrial function, which is involved in so many symptoms, can become a part of a vicious circle, with endotoxin and estrogen having central roles. Once the stage has been set by the combination of diet, stress, and toxins. And this is why healing is not an overnight thing. It's not a silver bullet. You've been eating vegetable oils for how many years? Your body has been built out of these things, okay? And there is a certain amount of time it takes to replace those polyunsaturated fatty acids in our makeup, in our body, and the other things that we've built our body out of. Okay, like it's talking about these indigestible starches getting stored in our organs, blocking blood flow. This takes time, and you have to be committed. A few months ago, I had a questionnaire circulated in a quote-unquote fibromyositis discussion group on the internet, and the consistency of responses was interesting. The questions were: 1. Have you noticed that any of your symptoms are worse premenstrually? 2. Have you noticed that any symptom is less severe premenstrually? 3. Do any symptoms seem to be worse periodically but without being associated with the premenstrual time? 4. Did your symptoms appear after use of oral contraceptives or IUD? Except for one woman who was taking oral contraceptives at the time she became sick and kept taking them, and who didn't notice any cycle, all of the answers to the first 3 questions, 15 of the 16 who responded, were identical: yes, no, and no. So yes, that they've noticed that their symptoms are worse premenstrually; no, that they have noticed any symptoms being less severe premenstrually; and no to the question of, do any symptoms seem to be worse periodically, not being associated with premenstrual time, right? So they all seem to notice that premenstrually all the symptoms got worse. The premenstrual estrogen dominance usually leads progressively to higher prolactin and lower thyroid function. Estrogen is closely associated with endotoxinemia and with histamine and nitric oxide formation, and with the whole range of inflammatory and quote-unquote autoimmune diseases. Anything that irritates the bowel, leading to increased endotoxin absorption, contributes to the same cluster of metabolic consequences. I have previously discussed the use of antibiotics and or carrot fiber and or charcoal to relieve the premenstrual syndrome, and have mentioned the study in which the lifespan was extended by occasionally adding charcoal to the diet. A few years ago, I heard about a Mexican farmer who collected his neighbors' runt pigs and got them to grow normally by adding charcoal to their diet. This probably achieves the same thing as adding antibiotics to their food, which is practiced by pig farmers in the U.S. to promote growth and efficient use of food. Charcoal, besides binding and removing toxins, is also a powerful catalyst for the oxidative destruction of many toxic chemicals. In a sense, it anticipates the action of the protective enzymes of the intestinal wall and the liver. And I need to remember this because I've got a farm here, and I have some animals that I would like to see get bigger quicker. And what a way to do that. I know most regenerative farmers and more naturally minded farmers are tossing out, logs out of their fire that are charcoaled to the pigs. And I need to do that on a more regular basis. Some women with premenstrual fatigue have found that the quote-unquote premenstrual phase tends to get longer and longer, until they have chronic fatigue. I found that to be one of the easiest quote-unquote PMS problems to correct. When people are older and have been sick longer, the fatigue problem is likely to involve more systems of the body. The larger the quantity of quote-unquote toxic fat stored in the body, the more careful the person must be about increasing metabolic and physical activity. Using more vitamin E, short-chain saturated fats, and other anti-lipid peroxidation agents is important. And I talked about this in my last video that I just did, that this is the problem that people make. They just go kind of like this cold turkey style of hardcore into whatever they're going to go into, not thinking about, well, if I'm already nutritionally deficient and not making enough energy, if I just throw the entire kitchen at this problem, then and my body starts creating energy more quickly and efficiently, it's going to increase my nutritional needs and things like this, right? You might have to be a little bit more calculated about how you approach your health, especially right off the bat in this transition phase. And this is how I can help. This is why I'm here with MissouriHealthCoach.com, because I want to be able to help guide people as they transition into this whole paradigm that is very difficult to wrap your mind around, right off the bat. The inflammatory diseases that develop after prolonged stress are sometimes hard to correct, but avoiding exposure to the major toxic allergens such as Carrageenan is an essential consideration, just as important as correcting the thyroid function and avoiding the antithyroid substances. Low cholesterol is very commonly involved in the diseases of stress, and like inadequate dietary protein, will make the system less responsive to supplementary thyroid hormone. The proliferative aspects of the inflammatory diseases represent, I think, a primitive form of regeneration. Arthritis, atherosclerosis, various granulomatous processes, breast diseases, liver adenomas, etc., provide an opportunity for investigating the various systems and substances that guide cell proliferation toward reconstruction, rather than obstructive and degenerative processes. Degenerative diseases probably all contain clues for understanding regeneration, as I have suggested in relation to Alzheimer's disease and inflammation. I will be talking about these in other newsletters, but the first step will always be to minimize exposure to the disruptive substances. And as usual, all the references at the bottom, which you can go through at your own time. Fantastic, quick article, not too long there, but cram-packed with good information that you can use immediately to start changing your health outcome. Until next time, guys, God bless.